Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name's Shadowwraith and today I'm going to be doing a video discussing Death Guard in 9th edition 40k. Now I'm extremely excited about this and I wanted to have a good read before I put out a video. If anyone's watched my previous 40k videos, you know I play Death Guard and I love them, and I've always loved them. Basically, what was wrong with Death Guard? Because they weren't considered a top tier faction at all. I really enjoyed playing them, and I seemed to do quite well with them. And there are lists out there that did work. But the main struggle was they're quite slow. Okay? So you got a lot of movement like 5 and 4 and half run speeds, stuff like that. So they struggle to get in range with a lot of their weapons or your melee, and that hurt you on things like getting victory points for first strike. It hurt you on grabbing objectives. I know I've gone against armies that were quite a bit quicker than me, and they could literally grab all the objectives turn 2, whilst I struggled to get my first couple of objectives. But you can get around that because at the end of the day they're slow, but they're tough as hell. They really are. They've got 3 up save pretty much every round apart from like poxwalkers and cultists. And on top of that, you've got disgustingly resilient, they're toughness 5, there's a hell of a lot of durability in them. And I love that. And they've also got objectives secured on their really durable Plague Marines, which is massive. And that's not going to change in 9th edition. So we're still going to have really tough durable units for with objectives secured to grab objectives. Now what makes this so good in 9th edition? Well, the scoring of objectives doesn't happen at the end of the turn anymore. Basically what happens is you score them at the start of your command phase, which is a new phase they've added into the game, which is basically the first phase you do in your turn. And you calculate how many points you get from objectives, and you get an extra command point. You always get another command point, which is massive for Death Guard as well. So, with having super tough durable infantry, you can grab the objective at your turn, or the enemy grab objective. You do have a chance to contest it, or use the objective secured, or take it off them, and they're going to struggle to shift you off that objective. Because, like I said, your toughness 5, disgustingly resilient, 3 up save, it's going to be really tough to get rid of you. On top of that, they were a very mid-board army, I'd say, because you wanted to slowly trudge forward, get to the centre of the board, hold the centre, and go for board control. That's how I used to play them. I used to try and get board control, but it did take a while. I'm using my hordes of poxwalkers or plague marines mainly. I did have my bloat drones to be a bit quicker, but the main body of my force was my troops, obviously. And why is that good in 9th edition? Well, basically it's because it fits the missions, how they work, because you want to be getting the ball control and you want to be grabbing all these objectives. On top of that, we've got now secondary objectives, so things like kill more units than your enemy have killed, which I think Death Guard could be quite good at, because sure, they're not the most killy faction in the game, not by far, but they are really tough to kill. So even if you kill 1 or 2 units, they're going to struggle to do it back to you. So yeah, I'm quite happy with that. On top of that, mid-board is where you want to be to grab all the objectives and all the other good stuff. The other thing I love is the change to setting units up in reserve. Now we can set up any units in reserve for command points. So I can now set up Mortarion in reserve, which is fantastic, because sure, Mortarion is pretty tough and you can put like Death Shroud Terminators with him to absorb wounds that he would take, but Death Shrouds aren't cheap, so you're still losing valuable models. But for 3 command points, I can put Mortarion in reserve, which means he can survive past turn 1, past turn 2 if you're going against a very shooty army, Tau or something like that. And he can turn up on turn 3, between turn 3, 4, 5. And by that point, you've got a chance to nullify their shooting or nullify their high damage weapons with the rest of your army. So when big boy Mortarion does finally turn up, there's a lot less for him to be threatened by, and then he can really dish out the damage and go for a late game kind of wins and kills and things like that. And another major change to 9th edition, which is, depending on your army, good or bad, is your tanks can no longer be tied up in combat and lose a round of shooting next turn because they have to withdraw and they couldn't shoot. Now they can. It doesn't matter. They can shoot in combat. And it works for our vehicles. So that's absolutely fantastic. And a lot of our vehicles are close range anyway. So you've got the flamers, the plague spitters, even like the mortar. If that gets tied up, it's still shooting, even in combat. I'm pretty sure, unless you have to shoot the unit that's in front of you. Anyway, if you do, never mind. You still got other weapons. And you ignore the moving and shooting penalties for heavy weapons on vehicles, which is fantastic. We absolutely love that. And the last thing I can think of that I just want to quickly mention here is it's really good that we get that free CP at the start of each turn in the command phase. And CP's command points are going to be a hell of a lot easier to have, and I'm going to have a lot more than I'm used to, because it's just, rather than trying to generate CPs with your list, you're given them depending on what you play, so what size game you play. So a 2,000 point game, you'll have more CPs than you would in like a normal like patrol kind of game, small point game, which is really handy because I can burn through CPs in a turn if I really wanted to. Death Guard works really well. You use your CPs, you've got your buffs and debuffs and loads of things you can do with CPs, healing units, making them harder to hit, or making them target, they can't target certain units if they're not the closest with Cloud of Flies. It's really, really good. Really, really good. And just having that security of knowing I'm going to have a CP, so I can do my Poxwalker stratagem where they recruit new Poxwalkers into their unit for every infantry model that died within 7 inches. Because that's only 1 CP, and I like using it. And I always try and save it, so I can generate and get my blob back, which is really handy. And the other reason I took so long to make this video is because I was just wanted to keep, get my feelers out there, see what kind of lists other people come up with, and see if it works well with the lists I'm thinking of. And there's one big thing that I think is absolutely massive, and it's how they've changed the fight phase. Now, the fight phase, basically what happens is, so charging units can fight first and stuff, but then when it comes to picking units, because you take in turns like you would, the opponent gets to pick first. So I've been charged, and after all the charged units get to go first, I then get to pick. We've got a little model called the Foul Blightspawn, and not only does he have a ridiculously awesome, potentially ridiculously awesome flamer, he's also got his Revolting Stench ability, which basically means enemies within, I think, 7 inches who charge don't count as having charged. Which means if I've bubbled my army and he can charge me, and he does, I'm still going to be able to pick one of those units to fight first. So if he charges my 20-man blob of combat-y Plague Marines, and they're near the Foul Blightspawn, guess what? They're still going to go first, because it's your turn, but I get to pick who fights first, and you charge me, and that could be devastating. Absolutely devastating to the enemy, especially if you're holding an objective. If it's holding a central objective, and you've got the Foul Blightspawn in there, surrounded by Plague Marines, and someone decides to charge you, try and shift you off it, it's going to be so hard to do that. So hard, because you get to fight first with your big killy squad. On top of that, I said they had a 3-up save, a 5-up disgusting resilience save at toughness 5. Well, if I bring my Blight Haulers, they've got a lovely little ability that allows me to count as being in cover for my infantry models, so long as they're within the aura's range, which is 7 inches. It's probably 7, everything's 7 in Urgle pretty much. And that means they're 2-up. They're 2-up for shooting. So if you do go against a gunline army, you've got stratagems that you can pay for with your free command point to choose which units can't get shot at by the majority of the opponent's army. On top of that, whatever they do shoot at, if it's Plague Marines, they'll have a 2-up save with a 5-up Disgusting and Resilient, and their toughness 5. So it could be really janky. And the toughness 5 is really strong in this edition, especially because now there's a cap on how many buffs you can have to a unit. So you can only buff a unit to be +1 to wound. You cannot go to +2 to wound, +3 to wound, or do anything crazy like that. And it's the same with to hit. You can only be +1 or -1 to hit. You can't be -2 or -3 or -4, whatever the stupid Eldar trickery was before. I went against an Eldar army and they were like minus everything to hit, and yeah, it was really silly. But no longer. You're -1 or +1. That's it. Nothing, no extras to that. And that just makes it even harder to get through the toughness 5. A lot harder, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I love it. Now, that's one of the tactics I've heard of. The other tactic is using one of the legions, which is Mortarian's Chosen Sons. And that basically lets you use a stratagem, which I'm not going to try and pronounce because I'll just butcher it. But it's 1 CP, and you pick a Mortarian's Chosen Sons Plague Surgeon before the battle starts, and he is replaced with an Elmbical Narthisium. Anyway, something Latin probably. And basically, when making Disgusting and Resilient rolls for friendly Mortarian Chosen Sons infantry models, whilst within 3 inches of this model, you can re-roll 1s and 2s. So you've got your 20-man squad of Plague Marines. They've got a 2-up save because they're in cover from the hauler, and they're still toughness 5, so they're really tough to wound. 2-up save, and they've got Disgusting Resilient, re-rolling 1s and 2s. So that's ridiculously good. That is ridiculously good. Yeah, and it's for the rest of the battle. On top of that, you've got another strategy, which is Plague Brewers, which basically lets you pick a unit from your army that is chosen to shoot, and until the end of the phase, they're Plague Belchers, Plague Burst Gauntlets, and Plague Spewers that they are equipped with causes 2 damage rather than 1, which is massive, absolutely massive. So that's so good. Anyway, so I'm very excited because I think Death Guard have benefited massively from 9th edition and from Psychic Awakening. I'm over the moon, and I'm going to still do some testing and moving bits about and see what kind of lists I can bring up, because there's quite a few that I can think of, but I want to put it to practice, or a practical test, rather than just going off theory, because we all should know what looks good on paper does not necessarily mean it works in practice. On top of that, going with the new edition, new army, I've gone for Militarum Tempestus as a pure force with Valkyries and that, and I will let you know how that goes and what kind of lists I do on that, and bring out videos on tips and tactics when I get some practice with them. But regarding that, stay tuned for more 40k on top of Middle-earth Strategy Battle Game, because with this new edition I am planning to dive straight in and get cracking and get back into the events. Thank you ever so much for listening, and if you enjoyed this kind of content, do give the video a thumbs up, and if you're feeling especially saintly, or Papa Nurgle is smiling down on you, maybe even subscribe. Even if you don't do either of those things, I still hope you have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.